South Africa, an emerging market internationally, a player in this big league. Are we really competent? Are we able?
Oh, we're able and ready and competent, yes, to the extent that we know what our strengths are. We also measure our competitiveness against other countries. I think we complement the BRIC family quite well, which now becomes BRICS. And being a developing economy as we are, we have certain strengths, and obviously being a gateway into Africa brings with it the power of the markets of Africa.
I mean, some critics, I'm using a terminology here in Japan, they said bricks without mortar. And basically the argument is, you know, these economies will eventually constitute 60% of global GDP, but they still very much need the traditional markets of Western Europe and America to grow. When you factor in South Africa into that, just a quarter of the size of the Russian economy, there is a sense that we're not really in a position to be competitive.
Well, you know, we'd argue that if you look at the recent trends, you know, particularly when the world was hit with its global financial crisis, we held our head up high. We were above water most of the time. Yes, we did feel the impact, as one would, and but that also demonstrated that we have the fundamentals in place that bring us into play. And you know, as much as competitors would like to play down our role, in recent times when South Africa talks, the world listens. And you know, we do have our impact. And BRICS, you know, without mortar, I'd say, you know, in the competitive environment in which we deal with, and our entire thrust as Brand South Africa is to profile South Africa so that it renders itself globally competitive.
If the technicalities of entering BRIC do weigh against us, in the sense that our economy is growing 3.2%, whereas the others are above 8%, if the size of our economy at just over $400 billion doesn't compare to 2-3 trillion in China, then what is it that South Africa is leveraging on? What do we contribute to this global institution?
Well, firstly, let's not talk about it as an institution. Let's talk about it as being a partnership in growing, particularly developing economies. And the thing about being developing is that you know you need to get somewhere. We're not arrogant to say we are there and we've arrived. And what it does in relation to this partnership rather than the institution is brings together best practices, where the rest of the BRICS partners have worked through certain issues, brings to it markets as well as production opportunities, which, again, being one of the only countries in Africa that is part of the BRICS family, is an ability for the BRICS partners to firstly reach our market, for us to be able to reach their markets, and also to share best practice amongst each other.
What about managing perceptions? Because that's very important. South Africa's got a myriad of things it's got to consider for prospective investors. A politicized labor force seems to be an impediment to investment. The skills deficit seems to be another impediment to investment. Across Africa, it's the issue of infrastructure and the lack of infrastructure. How do we manage those perceptions?
Sure. Lerato, you know, perceptions are something that affects even the best blue chip companies. You know, it's something that one needs to be aware of and awake to. You have to be aware that you measure these perceptions. You know, we can have a battery of negatives about whether it's a corporate, it's a business, whether it's a country, whether it's a government, etc. But what we need to do is not focus only on the negatives. We need to understand and address those negative perceptions, but we also need to build on the positives. So some of the items that you list may very well be the reality of what we see as being the negatives. But it would be great to be able to put our innovation on the table. Okay? Remember things like a politicized or you know, a labor force that is vocal, is active, is not unique of South Africa. In actual fact, our labor force has learned from the best in the world, and that's the so-called developed countries.
So what are we selling to the world when we say South Africa Incorporated, which is another term I've heard utilized? What is South Africa Incorporated offering to the shareholder, who is the international investor coming into this economy?
As far as the investor is concerned, we offer infrastructure, which is sound. There may be gaps, but we consistently address that. We have a regulatory environment, which is sound. We have a judiciary, which is independent. We also have a higher rate of return on investments that most developed countries are providing their investors these days. So from that point of view, our institutions are fairly strong. We do tend to be, as Africans, I hasten to say, pretty negative around our own challenges. And, and I'm really not trying to be subtle in that in regard, it's not really negatives, it's challenges. But, we are a young democracy as South Africa. And the strides we've made in recent times in terms of the international partners, the international investors. Right. We talk about ROI, and yes, it's about bottom line. Yeah. And a lot of investors, the fact that we have motor manufacturers still producing vehicles in South Africa means that we do produce.
And a final question, many people see South Africa as a gateway into the rest of Africa for those investors coming into the continent, particularly from the BRIC member states. The challenge, though, is South Africa's got its own internal human development issues, social problems. Can we really utilize this opportunity to market the rest of Africa? Even if we have the goodwill to do so, is it feasible?
Okay. One of the things we want to be cautious about is the fact that we don't want to set ourselves up as South Africa to be the answer to Africa. But we also understand that the success of our country is intertwined with those of our neighbors. Not only our immediate neighbors, but the entire bloc. Add to that the world operates as economic blocs these days. So when you look at yourself as a country and you look at what your ambitions are in relation to progress, you would only be able to materialize those ambitions if you take along and be able to provide some support to the rest of Africa.